painting in Mudbox. I know ZBrush has a huge amount of the popularity on the organic modeling front, but I find that Mudbox is an extremely intuitive way to jump into this very quickly. It's got a great interface. It's very simple to use. It talks directly with Maya. You can actually send files back and forth very, very easily. It's just a really, really great tool, especially if you're just trying to jump into this. So in this case, we're going to be just focusing today on how to do some texture painting in Mudbox. We're not going to go into the tools necessarily, just how to actually perform the function and get things back and forth between Maya and Mudbox. So just the really limited basics here today. This is a video, their promo video from the Autodesk website. So not something I made. I don't want to give the wrong impression here. So I'm just going to have this very simple character here, just this kind of cowboy character that we're going to be painting on. We're in Maya right now. Whenever you want to get things to Mudbox, you have to make sure, of course, for geometry, like with anything, you want it nice and clean before you get there, which ultimately means you want all your transits, rotates, and scales zeroed out. See, most of these I think are zeroed, but not all. So before I go, I'm just going to make sure in my outline everything's grouped together to keep it all organized. Everything should be labeled correctly here, and actually I'm seeing I'm not labeled correctly. This actually causes, it would be fine, but in Mudbox it's much easier to navigate when everything is named in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to do that really quick right now. Okay, now you'll see I just have everything named really nicely and organized in a way that's easy to find. That'll just make my job easier, both in Maya and Mudbox. Easy to do and worth the payoff in efficiency while you're working. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to modify freeze transformations on everything in here, which is just going to zero out all my transforms over here. I'm also going to go into Edit, Delete by Type, and History, which will get rid of any incoming information here. You wouldn't want to do this with a finished rig, but with just basic geometry, this is always a good idea, assuming you're done with modeling it, or at least done for the moment. And then if you want to, you can also center pivot on all your objects. It can make things easier to use depending on what you're planning on in the future. Right now, I'm fine with it where they are right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out and then get ready to paint. Now, of course, the other part of this is doing your UVs. So if you're familiar with UVs, the better you do your UV painting, I'll go over, let me pull up the UV menu real quick. Actually, I think I have it right here. Here we go. The better your UVs look, these are fine. They're not great UVs. Hold on, I hit the wrong button there. The better your UVs are, the nicer your painting and the more intuitive your painting will be in Mudbox. That means no distortion or stretching in here, and as always you want them to be all contained into this one box. Now you'll notice here that my character is separated into different pieces, different actual geometry. That's totally fine. Mudbox can work with that just fine. We'll paint very intuitively from one to the next, and also can paint them individually. If you have objects though that have UVs that are on top of each other, this is definitely problematic. So if you bring in a character with some props, like let's say this hat, instead of being all integrated into one map, let's say the hat was modeled separately and looks more like this. So if the hat in this case is taking up one entire map by itself, when I select them all, I now have overlapping UVs, and even though the hat is fine by itself, Mudbox is going to look at all these UVs at one time, and therefore this would cause an issue. If you have this case, it's still fine, but what you would need to do is go ahead and take your UVs here, your shells, and slide them over into the next UV space like this. So they're occupying the one from 1 to 2. So with this setup, you'd be just fine painting both. Now, of course, in this case, the paint detail on this hat will be much better and everything in here, just because of how much bigger it is in the same space. So in this case, since I was able to fit it all into one shell, I'm good to go. I'm gonna do that. Sorry, wrong button there. Okay, I did more than Sorry, I thought that would be a fast undo. So in this case, because they do fit all in the same space and the scale is correct, I'm just going to go with my normal setup. Now, one other quick tip here, just in case, if you're under a real time crunch, then taking the time to do UV layout might not be in the cards. Although I rarely ever advocate this, if you need to, you could do a quick automatic UVs. Going into my modeling menu under UVs and choosing automatic. Now, typically this creates horrible looking UVs, just unusable in every way, shape, and form. It explodes every object out into as many pieces as it needs to that are disconnected. This can cause lots of problems with other things in Maya, but for texture painting, Mudbox can navigate this effortlessly. It just is useless in every other program, and you'll see is useless also in some other areas in Mudbox. But if you're under time crunch, this could be just fine, and again, you won't see the difference when just painting normally. Obviously, as I just mentioned, you can't have overlapping UVs like this, so you'd want to fix your layout. To do that, you just go into UV editor, go to your modify menu, look for layout option box. In your options, go ahead and just reset them if you don't know what you're doing in here. There's lots of good options to work with. I am going to go ahead and choose rotate shells and enable that, which allows it to both translate and rotate these shells as it tries to get a better layout. You can also choose your texture map size, although for right now it's not going to really matter. I'll go to 2048 though. And then shell padding, just how many pixels of space, I guess this is where the texture map would matter. How much space do you want around each one of these? So in this case, I'll do a shell padding of 8, and a tile padding of 4. This is just what I'm comfortable with. If you want to do something different, that's fine. This will give me, I think I did that wrong actually. That's fine. This will give me, so tile padding will give me a 4 pixel width around the edge before it hits a shell, and then it'll give me 8 pixels between each shell, which is not as efficient as it could be, but it's a little bit nicer if you're trying to paint things by hand. Now in this case, doing automatic UVs, the chance of you painting things by hand is about 0, just because this is such a mess to work with. But again, if you're under a time crunch, this will give you very little stretch and distortion. It gives you thousands of seams, but again, Mudbox is fine with seams, so this would be okay there. In this case, because my original cowboy character was doing just fine without this, I'm going to use my normal UVs, which hopefully should give me nicer results. And be nicer to work with in other parts of Maya as well. All right, so we're going to export from here. Again, I don't have any shaders on here. I have no textures on here. I have nothing on here. This is just the base geometry, which is fine to start with in Mudbox. It's nice to kind of already get Mudbox up and running to make things a little faster. So here's the basic interface in Mudbox. To get your models over here, you could export as OBJ or FBX and then import, but the fastest way if you're working with Maya tools is you just select the geometry that you want to send over there, go to File, and choose Send to Mudbox. I'm going to choose Send as a new scene. And if I click on Mudbox again, you'll see my character's in there and ready to be worked on. Oops, I suddenly got the small one in there. Let me fix my scale. While scale technically doesn't matter in Mudbox or Maya, some tools just work better, just their defaults work better with a better size model. So in this case, a bigger one. My brushes will be the right size right out of the gate, which will be nice, things like that. So in this case, I have my character ready to go in Mudbox. If for some reason this doesn't work, the send to Mudbox or send to Maya, you can just go ahead and export and import as you normally would in any other program. Just this is a lot faster actually to work this way. If you're unfamiliar with the Mudbox interface, I'm going to show this really quickly, but basically you have our main window here. One nice thing about Mudbox is that the tools to move around your screen are exactly the same as the ones in Maya, so it's very comfortable right away, especially for people that have never been in Mudbox before. Along the bottom here we have sculpting tools, painting tools, and then some curve and posing tools and moving tools that we won't be using. So you're mostly going to spend your time in the sculpt and painting tools. And today we're just talking about painting. Again, I'm not going to go through every brush here. This is something you can explore through other tutorials. I just want to go through the basic process of getting things in, painting, and getting them out again. To the right over here, we have some ways to adjust our brush. We have stamps, stencils, fall off is a big one, which is typical to most programs. And we have some material presets, which I'm going to not really be using, but I'll talk about them really quick, and some lighting presets, which actually can be helpful while you're painting. Up here we have 3 tabs. The 3D view, which is the one that you're mostly going to be working in. A UV view, which shows the UVs of your character. In this case, only the parts that I have selected, which is the hat. And then image browser, which is for loading and saving images. I don't use that too much. On the right, this funky menu over here has a few different tabs. We have layers, which works for painting just like it does in something like Photoshop. You can see there's sculpting layers and painting layers. We're going to be painting, so we'll be here today. And then your object list, which is all the models you're seeing, kind of like the outliner in Maya. So here, and it has everything in here. So here you have the cameras, but it also has your material nodes, kind of like in the Hypershade, but in here they're in this sort of outliner view. And then all your different parts of the character, which you can select or deselect and do what you need to. And then there's some viewport filters here, which allows you to put in some effects like ambient occlusion or something, things like that. They're just visual effects. They don't transfer over to the actual texture. Now, I suppose I should mention before we get into this, one quick thing down here. You'll see at the bottom right whether or not it's actually connected directly to Maya, whether it's ready to go back and forth. And same thing in Maya, you'll see when I open this up that it says whether it's connected to Mudbox or not. You can update the scene, but I'll show you the way I prefer to do that in just a minute as we start painting. So again, you'll notice I don't have any shader on here. This is just the default Lambert. We'll be making a new shader in just a minute, and it does it automatically. When I'm really working in this, I prefer to make the shader first, but honestly, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so as you get ready to go, and again, you'll notice, I should mention here, you'll notice now that everything named correctly makes things much easier to figure stuff out, and it also comes over in the same order as it was in Maya, so that's also really good. If you want to set your scene up in a way that you feel more comfortable, in terms of texture, color, anything else, you can select one of the default shaders. This one right here, the flat, gray flat, might be a good one to work with, just that it's not giving you, it's not adding any specular highlights or creating weird colors or reflections. It's just the base level material. I don't mind having the shiny one that I have right here, right now. The default gray with a little bit of highlight actually makes some parts easier to see, but it is going to affect my perception of the textures. But that's fine for right now. So, and you have to forgive me, I'm working with a mouse today and not a pen, so this will be a little bit rougher than it would normally be, but it's fine for today's purposes. You can also adjust your lighting presets to whatever you want, to what makes more sense, but these default ones work nicely for what I'm doing right now. So it's going to pop over to that fall off menu. Okay, so how do we paint? The good news is it's about as straightforward as it can possibly get. If you click on any part of the character and it doesn't have a texture map on it, it's going to immediately ask you, can I make one? So I'll click and it says, hey, there's no texture layer here, no paint layer. Let's make a new one. I'll call this Cowboy Colors. Size is a size of your map. This is defaults to a 2K, which is a nice detail. If you want more detail, you can jump up to a 4K or 8K map. Probably most people are going to stick to the 4K range. This 1K range is going to be pretty tiny. I'll just stick in the 2K for now. If you start painting and realize you don't like the resolution of the texture, okay, then choose a new one and up the level. You can choose which channel to paint on. For most people, if they're just doing a basic texture map, you're going to be working on the diffuse layer, which is just the basic color layer. But you could also paint things like specular highlights and incandescence and opacity and all this stuff over here. For right now, we're just going to stick on diffuse. So I'll hit OK. And you won't see any difference, but you can actually start painting right away. So let's just go ahead and do that. I just want to show you how easy that is without getting lost in all the details. So over here, I'm going to choose my paintbrush. A lot of those other things that you recognize that you can play with as well. We're just going to stick with this for right now. As soon as you click on it, you'll see over on the right-hand side that we have our a color tab. If you double-click, you get your color options. All these things should look pretty familiar to most people. You have color palettes you can make. You can enter stuff in by numbers, all the normal stuff. So here, I'm just going to start with a brown base. It's a pretty bad color, isn't it? That's fine for right now. It's just a demo. Over here, you'll see typical options like size, strength, which is essentially kind of like flow or opacity. You can mirror this across different sides, X, Y, or Z, local or world. I'm just going to choose this off right now so I don't get symmetrical textures. You can add things like stamped images, which I probably won't hit in this tutorial. You can look up that stuff in other tutorials. And a lot of things like snapping to curves, which actually I don't want. So let's just go ahead and look. So as of this, you'll notice that whatever I selected last is highlighted. This is one pretty frustrating thing about Mudbox. You can still paint anywhere, even with this on, but it changes the color of what we're seeing. So I'm going to right click and choose deselect model, which will just turn it back to the base level color. At this point, I can just go ahead and start painting. So I can just literally click on the character. You'll see it automatically overlaps different parts of the character without having to do anything additional. So it just goes from one to the next. It's very seamless and very intuitive. If you hold in the B key, B, and scroll back and forth, you can change the size of your brush very quickly. If you hold in M, you can change the strength of it. You can see on the right-hand side, it's scrubbing to a higher and lower strength. I'm going to leave it at 100% for right now. So literally, that's it. You can paint directly on here. If you want to paint on one object at a time, for example, right now I don't want to hit the body. I just want to get that face. I can use these buttons over here to hide different parts of the body, and then paint on the skin directly. Here I'll hide the arms, and just leave the hands and the head exposed, and I'll paint those a different color. Let's go with let's have some fun. We'll go with a blue tone. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger. Just kind of get it right on there. There you go. You can use the A and F key to zoom in on different parts of the body, just like you do in Maya. Let's see. I think F works a little differently here. F works by, you have to put the mouse where you want it to focus on. Press F. It doesn't necessarily zoom in like it does in Maya, but it will put the center point right there. So if you're having trouble moving around, F, and now I'm focused on the hand instead. So we'll bring the body back. And let's get this thing into Maya. Let me just get the arms. Actually, the arms look fine gray. I like it. So if right now we have some texturing going on there, let's go ahead and get this into Maya. And I'll show you how to go back and forth. So there's multiple ways to get this into Maya. The easiest one by a landslide is going over here and choosing your body parts that you want to get back into Maya, going to File, and over here Send to Maya, and you choose Update Current Scene. If you run into any trouble, you can also just send selected as a new scene. It'll just replace everything in Maya with just this. Especially if it's good to do if you've done modeling changes, but actually that's not even true. It depends on where you're at in the production. For right now, I'm just going to say I don't want to get too crazy with this. I'm just going to update the current scene in Maya, hit the button, and you'll end up with this menu here if you haven't already established a texture path. Mudbox needs to know where it wants you to save out that texture map that you just made. It has a default place here, but I'm going to go ahead and set up a new one. So I'm just going to quickly use their interface to navigate to my folder. Normally, if you're working on a Maya project, this would be your source images folder in the Maya project. I'm going to go ahead and I just have a texturing folder that I'm doing this demo in. I'm just going to choose that folder. You'll see it update right here. This part you can ignore for right now. What we really want to do is just tell it which channel we're using in this case, just diffuse. We want to say use a default path, and you have to give it a name. In this case, I'll just call it, this will end up being the name of your actual file. I'll call this Cowboy Text. Once you do that and you have that information there, you'll see the OK button highlight. You hit OK. Now it knows where to save the TIFF file that we just made. You can see it says exporting mesh. Since I did update scene, it's going to export the mesh and the texture if there's any updates to either. In this case, there's only updates to the texture, so that's all it'll affect in Maya. If I go over to Maya now, I should be able to see it. Let's see what we get. So I'm going to press 5, then 6 for texture mode, and you can see the textures are already in Maya ready to go. If I went into my hypershade, in fact, I'll do that really quick. So in the hypershade, you'll see a new shader here, Lambert 2. We can change the shader later. Mostly, we're just focusing on the color channel right here. If you did have other channels that you're painting, like transparency or ambience or incandescence, those would be mapped automatically as well. Since we only painted the Lambert, the basic diffuse channel, excuse me, this is all we get. If I click on my little arrow here, you'll see the image name, and if you go to the file, you'll see it's going to cowboytex.tiff right there, and you can see it's painting on the texture. This is the texture map we just painted according to our UVs. Again, if you did those automatic UVs the super cheap way, it would work exactly the same. The only difference is it'd be much harder to tell what's what in this part. I can tell that these are the pants, I can tell that this is the body, and that this is the hat. So that's the advantage of doing good UVs amongst many others. So that's the basic process. Once you have that down, it's just a matter of getting used to some of the other tools, and it has lots of tools to play with. Certainly not as many as something like Photoshop, and not as many as ZBrush, but it has plenty of stuff there to get you really, really far and do some really beautiful work. I'd venture to say it's the type of thing you can get kind of lost in, just because it's that level of fun. I'm going to show you a couple more tools here, but that is the basics of going back and forth. If you made changes here to the model, you'd want to go ahead and I typically, when I come from Maya to Mudbox, I do send things as a new scene, but you could also just updates back and forth. Or if you want to, like, let's say you made a holster for him, and you want to add it, you could just choose add to current scene, and in Mudbox, you'd see that show up here as a new model as part of the whole setup. Don't forget, it's very easy to, when you're going back and forth, to feel like this is all just in Maya, but it's a good idea to save your progress here in Mudbox as you go as well, so that you can have access to both files. But if you forgot, you could always just re-export the Maya from model. You just lose a lot of your control here that you otherwise might have had. So let me show you a couple more things that'll definitely be useful to the average person. Again, I'm not going to go through all the brushes. A lot of these things are fairly self-evident. If you turn on a stamp and then adjust your color, you'll get what you think you're going to get, which is ultimately a texture. So, and again, you know, there's plenty of places to play here to get lots of cool, not that this is it, lots of cool effects, and then get that right into Maya. But you can probably see very quickly how effective this could be at getting something painted up when you're in a hurry, or if you have the time to paint something up in a really impressive way. So, you know, do a full-on texture job. So again, let me just show you a couple quick tools here that are really great. One of them, which is kind of one that's fairly unique to Mudbox as far as I know, that I really, really like. Turn off that stamped image. If you go over to, if you select your objects, in this case I'll select all of them. If I go to the UVs and maps and choose flatten to UV space, it's going to take my character and actually flatten out the actual mesh into its UVs. And from here, you can actually paint directly on the UVs. Now, if your UVs are something that you can actually look at and recognize for what they are, this can be a very, very powerful tool, as you might be able to imagine. Let's see here. Oh, I'm an RGB. That's why this is weird. So here, I know this is the hat. So if I start painting on the hat with whatever color that is, I must not have hit OK or something. Or it might just not. And it might also be, yeah, it's being affected by the light. That's, again, the downside is I turn with the light, it's actually affecting my perception of the color. So you do want to be a little careful there. Maybe I'll throw in a quick stamp for more texture. I don't even know what I'm painting at this point. I'm just showing you how it works. And at any point here, if I go to unflatten from UV space, so here, if I just, I'll select off of the hat, and what you'll see now is I have instant texture on the hat from painting on it in the UV layout, which is pretty cool. Again, it's a great way to get some effects really fast. You can also paint in layers here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a layer on his coat. Maybe we'll do it for his shirt, which is kind of just blended in there. So if I select the, you do have to select the model first. So I'll select the body. This is kind of weird, but I'm going to then, well, here, I'll keep it selected for a moment. Over here, it'll show my current texture layer, which I can turn on and off, just so it actually affects the rest of the character too. And here, I'm going to go ahead and under the paint layer, so I'll select paint, I'm going to add a new layer. I'll call this body shirt. Hit OK. So now we have a new layer here, which you can also turn on and off and paint again over the whole character. Later on, we're going to merge these, so don't worry about having 10, 12, however many layers you want. It will have a lot, right? Add up to the memory add a lot to the memory right now, but when you export it and merge it together, it won't. So here, again, my object list. I guess let's deselect over here. So right-click, deselect. Again, make sure I'm on the right layer. And now, if I were to go in here and grab my paintbrush, I'll give him a whitish shirt. In here, maybe I'll choose a harder fall off so that it's easier to paint inside here. And it looks like I still have a stamp on, so I'll turn that off. And now I can go ahead and paint right here. I could lock off parts if I wanted to, so I don't make mistakes. But the nice thing here, actually, I could even be pretty dirty with this. And because it's on a separate layer, I can also then use my erase. And because it's just a layer, it doesn't affect the ones above it, which is really nice. Again, please forgive me, I'm working with a mouse here, so it could be cleaner. But you can see very quickly how you can get him a shiny dance shirt. When you export this should compress them down into one layer. So again, I'll go back to my object list. I'll grab my body parts to update. I only have to select the ones that I've actually updated, but I'll just update everything. It'll be a little bit faster. I won't have to think about it. So update current scene. And now you see it shows up here in my new setup, or in my Maya setup. And this is just ready to go. Again, assuming you've worked with a project file and you have your textures going to the right place, they should automatically be linked. If you do move them later, then you would actually have to go in and relink them up. But other than that, it's good to go. I encourage everyone to play with the tools. There's lots of cool tools here. A lot of ones you expect to see if you're used to things like Photoshop. The stamps are all pretty self-explanatory. You can make your own as well by loading them in. I believe, yeah, there's a little arrow here. You can just add a stamp, which is just bringing in an image. There's also stencils, which are a little bit different. They allow you to project texture on here. For those of you that are still hanging around watching this, I'll show it to you really quick just because that one's a little bit different, or a little bit less self-explanatory. Nuts. Yeah, that was a mistake. Sorry, I tried to drag one of these on top of each other when I didn't mean to. Well, I guess this is a chance to show you what happens if you didn't save your file in Mudbox, because I didn't. So if I were to grab this guy, I can go ahead and send it out to Mudbox again. This time, though, because I didn't actually save out my scene in Mudbox, which was a huge mistake, I can just save it out, send it as a new scene, and try again. The one difference here is I expect I will have lost my layers when this opens up again. So let's wait and see. I didn't have Mudbox open, so this will take a second to update. So here I am back in Mudbox, and you can see that my character came in just as he was before. But again, I expect if I switch over to my paint layers that I've lost all my layers, which obviously if you did a complex paint job, this would be really frustrating because it automatically merged them in Maya. I do want to show you again, let's just finish up. I'm going to show you how to do a stencil if you want. So here, I'm just going to work on the pants. So I'll actually show you something else too. If you hit this button right here, you can lock off layers that you don't want to affect. This is a huge downside to Mudbox. I wish they'd fix this. But when you lock something off, you'll see that the color changes. So if you're trying to match colors, it's really a nightmare. So that's a huge downside to Mudbox, in my opinion. And I've not been able to find out a way to turn that off. So again, we're going to be over here in the paint tools. I'm going to use, In this case, I'm going to use the projection brush. If you use the paintbrush, you won't get all the color from the stamp. So if you don't want the color from the stamp, then you want to use the paintbrush. If you want to use get direct control, then actually a projection brush works a little bit better. You do need to choose a stencil. In this case, I'll choose, that's kind of funny, I'll choose this leather pattern. Why not? We'll do elephant. The way this works, is a little bit weird at first, but once you get used to it, you realize how powerful it is. So I can actually move my character in and out behind the stencil. I can also, you see the options right here, you can also move your stencil around using your mouse and also zoom it in and out. So you can be at any level with the model or the stencil. But what you see is what you get. So I'm going to move in a little bit closer. This is going to be a little funky. Actually, I'll do a slightly bigger texture here. So you want to think about your scale in advance. And also think about the angle. So as I rotate around this, I'll press F to get my new center point. You also want to think about, as it wraps around the model, what it's going to do. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And we'll go vertical to kind of match the line of the pants. This is going to look pretty funky, but it'll be fun anyway. So here, I'm going to shrink my brush down, turn off. Looks like it has some symmetry going on. So turn off my symmetry. You would have to choose your color. And then whenever you paint, it's gonna, wherever you see that stencil, you're gonna see that texture appear. And as you move around the character, you'll see that stencil line up. You can kind of match it to where it was before and paint back in. Again, you should be thinking about your fall off. A softer fall off here would probably be a little smarter. My strength, probably a little bit less, would also be smarter, but I'm having fun. So kind of work your way through it, do some blending. You can also hide the stencil by pressing Q, but then you're in the awkward position of not actually knowing where it is. But you can get it close, then hide it. Oops. Oh, okay, I thought you could actually paint through it when it's not there, but that's my bad. So as long as you're holding the mouse button, you will see it. This is a little bit awkward to work with, but when you stop holding the mouse button, it disappears. So it makes it a little bit clunky, but you can still get some really cool effects very quickly. Just gotta ruin that front part. And of course, if you go to your UV view, you'll see that those are now textured directly in there. So definitely a very powerful tool to play with. If you don't want to deal with the color of the projection map, you can use paintbrush as well, which just gives should just give you the direct color of the paintbrush itself. You couldn't tell with this one because it was a black and white, so you can definitely see it's a different effect as you project through this one. It does also takes into account the red and the black and the white in there. But you can see it gives you a different effect, whereas the projection map will give you exactly what you see here, tinted in the color that you've chosen. So there you go. So you can see, again, some very powerful tools to play. You can get very lost in this, but very cool and intuitive way to work, going back and forth between Maya and Mudbox. So happy texturing. Hope you get some good playtime out of this.